Um, all right, so I've got a bit of a slide deck to run through that gives an overview. I guess it's strongly guided by the structure that Barrett gave us. So hopefully it's I guess consistent and you get what you need out of it. So yeah, I'll just run through a little bit about who Seymour Whyte is, the project that we started a little over probably 18 months ago now. How we've used the API, and I guess some of the bumps and issues and learnings that we've had along the way. So Seymour Whyte is an ASX-listed Australian construction company. We're about 300 staff across the country. Plus, obviously, being in construction, there's a lot of contractors and subcontractors. So, as a size of an organisation in turnover, around about $300 million a year. We've got offices spread across the country. Our head office and where I'm presenting from is in Brisbane. We've got offices in Sydney, Townsville, Melbourne and Perth as well. And we work across primarily in the transport sector, so roads and bridges, but we also work in resources and utilities, underground tunnelling and stuff like that. And I guess what differentiated Seymour Whyte for me was really a strong systems vision around being fully integrated, fully mobile. So recognising that although construction is often slow to take up new technology, there's a kind of growing recognition that it's a differentiator in our industry. So we really had a bit of a license under our former CEO of taking that vision and running with it. So on to the project. I guess, a little bit different to Tom and Lucas. We started with a very strong native iOS development capability. So we'd built a number of mobile apps, including a site diary, which I just got a screenshot of on this slide, as well as a quality management application that does ITPs and kind of field-based forms. Our HSE system, on the other hand, is a SQL-based forms application, so not as easy to port into that iOS platform. And we needed something that would deliver mobility to that platform, but also take the bottleneck out of our development team. So obviously, when you've got some internal development capability, there's a drive to sort of build everything. So we wanted to pull away from that a little bit and deliver something with a platform solution. So we went out looking at a number of platforms, and we got each of the companies to present to us, and we went through an evaluation process, and yeah, and iForm came out on top. Again, primarily, probably consistent with the last guys, is the ability to get the data in and out of it, and certainly the flexibility with which you've got to design forms, I think, was a big sell as well. So that was kind of Q3, late Q3, we were doing that evaluation, and we were live with our first integrated forms by January 2015. So really was a very short turnaround in a development sense. Okay, so a little bit more about I guess our initial scope was built around 4 or 5 kind of common forms. So our weekly OHS inspections. This is a monster checklist. It was kind of printed out in paper previously, and it went over pages. I think it was some 190 odd questions in 29 sections. The iForm built a solution that enabled us to break that up into chunks where you could just select the parts of the inspection that were relevant to you. iLeads, which are the kind of the safety conversations that our guys have on site. Hazard observations, which you're probably familiar with. SWIMs, or Safe Work Method Statement observations, are a review of how work is being done in the field. And importantly, action management. And we saw by making our action management database mobile and accessible from the field, we saw a 6-fold increase in the actions being collected. We added a few other forms later in 2015 around weekly vehicle inspections, environmental forms, and planned arrival, and I'll touch on those in a little bit more detail. So where does the API fit with all of this? Similar to the last guys, we started with populating option lists and doing things like segmenting option lists by project, managing user accounts as well. So when a new user is created in our safety database, we create the user in iForm. We generate a password, set that, our system emails that to the users. So they've got a fairly seamless authentication, kind of first authentication experience. The action management stuff is we've used assigning forms to assign actions to people, and then we're collecting plant data and also pushing plant data lookup lists out to the devices. And receiving iLead conversation data into our databases. So let me just drill now into each of those in a little bit more detail. So option lists, I guess the two types of option lists that we're working with, the data lookups, so just a straight list, simple population, and also the conditional lookups, which is the segmented option list that I mentioned. So loading up the people and project relationships and the dependencies between them. One of the challenges that we came across, in fact it materialized just recently, was that because we're populating the option list dynamically, you must use the ZC display value to get the text of what the value was when the form was completed. Because the IDs of the forms change, even the record view in iForm Builder will show kind of spurious values because it's driven off IDs, and the values attached to those IDs change. So the ZC display value is really, really important. So user accounts, as I said, users we create them in our database, and we use the API to create those user accounts in PSEM with a random password, and that's sent out to the user to log in. We do still have to go through the manual step of assigning that user to the right groups within iForm Builder so they see the forms that they're supposed to see. We did run into a bit of a challenge with this when iForm changed the password complexity requirements. So I went from kind of a simple password to 8 characters, complex characters, and capitals and things like that. So yeah, we just had to kind of adjust to that. Our action management process, I think we're kind of probably using iForm to I guess to its potential here is actions are a common subform in our iForm setup. So they're called from lots of different parent forms, and they can be 2 or 3 levels deep in a form set. So basically, if there's something wrong in an inspection or an iLead or something, you'll generate an action to correct that situation. So that action data, as I said, is buried deep in a JSON packet. So rather than using the HTTP post process, which we've used in other forms, we actually use the fact that there's a post to trigger a query using the API back to that actions table. The actions table pulls data from just from in relation to actions, puts that into our SQL actions table. But then a second service takes data from that actions table and pushes it out to a different form, which we call assigned actions. And that assigned actions form is the one that's assigned to a user so that they see the action that they've been assigned within iForm with the details of the action required. You can see here's an example of that form there. They can then respond with closing the action, or they can reject that, which goes back to the person that created the action, or they can reassign that to someone else. So all of that kind of happens using the iForm logic. Once that action's closed, then we use, again, the API to push that back into the SQL database. Later in the year, we did a plant onboarding process. So this was our first experience with using lookup tables populated from the iForm, from our SQL database. So we had something like 5,000 pieces of plant, and we populate a lookup table, which is a concatenation of owner, plant type, and registration number, using the dynamic search in iForm that makes it very kind of easy to look up method of finding plant items that haven't previously been stickered. We've got a sticker that has QR codes in it, so that if a piece of plant comes in with a QR code sticker already on it, you can scan that, and then that will use the lookup table, which we also upload, to look up the plant data, so then you can record the inspection against it. So the last one is, before I jump into some of the challenges that we've had in this space, the last one is iLeads, which is the traditional HTTP listener. So because it's a top-level form, we're just listening for a JSON post, and that data goes straight into, populates into, so that should be PSEM, our HSC database. So what challenges have we faced? Initially, in the early days, we were using polling, time-based polling, and we set that a bit high, so we ended up with overage charges. So I'd suggest using trigger-based polling or the HTTP listener. So I think every couple of minutes, if you poll, then you'll hit the overage limits. One of the things that we still face and we're working with is a limit of 100 items per, if you like, parcel of data for uploading to option lists. So when we've got a 5,000 item option list, we're having to do 50 transactions to populate that. And again, working with large option lists, because they have to be downloaded in their entirety, that takes a long time, so we really limit the updating of that plant items option list. The lookup tables, on the other hand, will only download the new lookups. So we download new fields into that lookup table every time, but the option list, we do have to limit how often that's downloaded, just because of the size of it. There's the old, we've got different people creating forms than Dan, who does the kind of API development for us. So sometimes users take it upon themselves to rename fields, which causes all sorts of havoc with our APIs. So that's probably a no-brainer, but it's worth saying. And we had some issues with missing headers in API posts. I think, Dan, you might have to talk to that one.
We had quite a few issues with, we had quite a bit of contact with the help desk to start with, because we would quite often have a header twice, or a header missing, or the wrong post instead of put, things like that, and text encoding. So what we have to do still with one of our option lists is to download the existing one and replace its data and send it back. We still haven't figured out why that happens.
Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of our issues and challenges. But despite that, really the overall picture is we've overcome all those those little challenges, and the iForm solution adds an enormous amount of value to our processes, and does really speeds the process of form development and integration integration and mobilization of our existing SQL database. So Berit, if we can go to questions now.
Sure, that was great. I think it's really helpful for everyone to kind of see how you've been able to really customize this workflow with the API. And I've been fortunate enough to kind of see you guys through this process, working with you early on with the Kickstarts. But just a question quickly about, you mentioned that something silly that you have to talk to your users about the data column names and making data column names that don't match with your API. Have you built any kind of document that you share with your users so that they have a list of terms that they should use?
No, well, there's only a few people that I guess one or two people that build forms, and we've trained them, shall we say?
Perfect. And then the other piece here is, what language were you using when you were using our API, and did you feel that there were enough resources in the iForm Builder help desk to get you started with that?
So we use a .NET environment, but I leave the technical stuff up to Dan, so I might throw to him for an answer.
Yeah, no, there was lots of help available. The API docs are pretty translatable into any language, so it was, yeah, that was awesome. And the help desk, I think Penny was the lady we were dealing with, was fantastic.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for that. There is another question coming in, and it's just what's the reason for limiting the list upload packages to 50 items for the option list?
Yeah, I think that's, now Tony might have a view on this, but my understanding is that there's, when you're uploading to an option list, you've got a limit of 100 items that you can upload at any one time into an option list. So when you've got a very big option list, you have to break your data into parcels of 100.
And Tony, do you want to mention anything else with that?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So that is very much a true statement for the new version. I guess what I would suggest, if you want to take a look at it, is considering falling back to 5.1 for your option list requests, only because there's no limit there.
Okay, that might be worth looking at. Thanks.
Yep.
And Tony, while we have you on here, people can use both intermittently, right? They don't have to just use 6.0 or just use the 5.0.
No, I mean again, it's kind of something probably everybody on this call will understand. The code we wrote a year ago will never be as good as the stuff that comes out today. So we support both versions. There are differences between the two. In some cases, this is something that hinders these guys, or not really hinders them, but forces them to make a number of requests to do the same thing that 5.1 would let you do in a single request. So yeah, I mean, you can certainly have the majority of your integration running on the latest, and then if you find there's advantages to using some older requests, certainly plug those in where they make sense.
Well, thank you, Tony, and a big thank you to our Seymour Whyte group, Mark and Dan. That's been a great presentation. If you had to leave people with one piece of advice, if they're just getting started with building their automation, what do you think it would be?
Be persistent. No, actually, no, I'm going to say understand the process, understand the business problem that you're solving. I think the technical stuff works itself out. There's always a solution, but it is really about understanding kind of why people are doing what they're doing to get the solution right.
Perfect. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with that. I think a lot of times when people jump into this, they may not understand what their end goal is, or they may not even understand what their end users experience. And so building that workflow and building that process and understanding is definitely a key part of that. So thank you again.